When questioned, most of these men could not remember when they'd last eaten a decent meal. Many had been beaten and tortured so long their minds had failed.
In the cemetery, we have buried easily a dozen survivors of the camps of Europe. It says on the marker here, you know, Willie was incarcerated in Auschwitz and Helen in Skaržisko. These were not nice places. And it says on the grave here also, never forget. Now, there are some arguments about forgiveness, but memory is what we're talking about here. And their marker here is really very explicit. They were in some terrible places. They were Holocaust survivors, and at least within the Jewish community, we're not to forget that. This memorial, I imagine, is one of the first built in Canada. It was built in 1981 when a committee of people from our congregation thought it was time to find a place to recognize the victims of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, in part because so many of our families, and that includes my family, have no final burial place. They were incinerated, they were buried in mass graves, and there was no place to remember them. And so the community decided to build a place for memory of our families who perished in the years between 1939 and 1945 in Europe. The construction itself is very brutal in a way, and a lot of people would have preferred it to be a little gentler, but in fact it's a symbol, as you can see behind me, of a chimney. I don't think it could be more stark than that so many of the victims of National Socialism ended up in gas chambers and ended up in crematoria, and their remains went up through the chimneys. And so the folks who built this, who designed it, and a number of them were people who had been in places where they did see their families go up in chimneys. That's the symbol they wanted to build on in the Holocaust Memorial, not something of transcendence, but something of very physical brutality, as that reminder of what had happened. The Dutch Jewish community suffered very high losses. Over 70% of all the Dutch Jews were murdered during that time. My father's family, part of it, was able to get out prior to the war, but of the family that remained in Holland, there was one survivor I have a photograph of 22 people, and one person survived. My mother's family, her mother, father, brother, almost all of her cousins, aunts, and uncles were murdered. Getting up towards Risha Kraskin's grave, Risha was a tiny woman from Poland. She was a survivor of 5 concentration camps. A remarkable fact that she survived all of that, from the 2, the Częstochowa and Skarżysko in Poland, and then Ravensbrück and others in Germany. Ravensbrück was a place where they did medical experiments on women, and a horrible place that she survived. Risha had a brightness and an optimism and a hopefulness that I always found very beautiful, and I sat with her in the same pew in our synagogue. And I think, what a wonderful bit of luck that she had to be able to survive all of that and end her life with a family that loved her and a community that loved her, and to be buried here on the soil of Vancouver Island. Dr. Agatha Feldman. Agatha was a physician, psychiatrist, a poet, a painter, a survivor of concentration camps, but she never felt that she really had suffered as much as others. When you look at her grave, it's very subtle. She doesn't say she was in camps, but you can see the Star of David that's traditional on many Jewish graves. The Star of David is there, but it's barbed wire. And she also has arranged for markers for her parents who, perishing in the Shoah, would not have a place to be remembered. As a modern post-Second World War country, Canada has been an incredible light to people around the world as a place of refuge. And our culture has been hugely enriched by waves and waves of immigrants that have made us, I think, one of the most remarkable countries in the world, really a place where we all have different histories and we all seem to get along with each other, and in fact even embrace the variety of cultures as being something uniquely Canadian. But what a monument like this reminds Canadians today is that it wasn't always that way, that we know that during that period in the lead up to the Second World War, Canada was a very xenophobic society that famously, coming through the mouths of the Deputy Minister of Immigration at the time, who, when asked how many Jews Canada would take, said, "None is too many." We've come a long ways from that. And so a monument like this and a place like this reminds us how things can be very wrong in a society as well. But also, I think we have to remember that maybe as a society we learned a lot from that sense of intolerance that led to so many maybe needless deaths. And instead we're now a country that has traditionally welcomed and continue to welcome people from all over to create this wonderful tapestry and mosaic that's Canada.